Alright, so listen, I need to tell you about what went down on First Take yesterday morning because I'm still thinking about it hours later. I had just gotten back from the gym, grabbed myself some breakfast, turned on ESPN, and boom, there's Stephen A. Smith, Shannon Sharpe, and Mad Dog Russo getting into this absolutely heated debate about the Los Angeles Rams and whether they should be going after Chris Olave from the Saints. And man, the way this conversation unfolded had me literally sitting on the edge of my couch because they were touching on everything from Matthew Stafford's MVP season to the Rams championship window to what this team needs to do to get back to another Super Bowl. Hey, what's up everyone? Real quick before we get into everything, that like button is literally what determines if this reaches hundreds or thousands of fans. Takes 1 second, but makes a huge impact on the channel's growth. Just smash that like button right now. It's the easiest thing you can do, but honestly the biggest way to support this content. Every single like pushes this further, so hit it now. The segment actually started in a really unexpected way because they opened with highlights from Matthew Stafford's MVP acceptance speech. And if you remember, that's when Stafford casually dropped the bomb that he's coming back for another season. Stephen A. was the first one to jump on this, and he had this look on his face like he'd been waiting all morning to talk about this topic. He goes, "Now listen, Matthew Stafford just won the MVP award. He's coming back for another year. And if I'm the Los Angeles Rams, I'm asking myself one very important question right now." And you could tell by the way he paused that he was about to go deep into this. Stephen A. continued, "What am I going to do to make sure that Matthew Stafford's final years in this league are spent competing for championships and not just being a good team that falls short in the playoffs?" Shannon Sharpe immediately jumped in, and this is where the Chris Olave conversation really started to take shape. Shannon was talking about how the Rams have been in this interesting position for the past few years where they've been competitive, they've made some noise in the playoffs, but they haven't been able to get back to that Super Bowl level that we saw when they won it all a few years ago. Shannon brought up how the receiving core in Los Angeles right now is solid, but not spectacular, and he started breaking down how Puka Nacua is obviously a stud and is going to be a star in this league for a long time, but outside of Puka, who are the guys that defenses are truly scared of? Shannon was really hammering this point home about how championship offenses need multiple weapons, and right now the Rams might be one elite receiver short of having that complete offensive attack that can beat anybody. Mad Dog came in hot like he always does, and he was yelling about how the Rams just watched their quarterback win the MVP award and announce he's coming back for another season. And if they don't do everything in their power to surround Stafford with weapons, then they're wasting what could be the final great years of a Hall of Fame career. Mad Dog was getting fired up, talking about how the Rams have always been an organization that's willing to make bold moves. They're not scared to trade draft picks. They're not scared to go all in when they have a championship window. And right now, they have exactly that kind of window with Stafford playing at an MVP level. Stephen A. brought the conversation specifically to Chris Olave, and this is when things got really interesting. He started breaking down Olave's situation with the Saints, talking about how New Orleans is an absolute salary cap hell right now, and they're probably gonna have to make some really difficult decisions this offseason about which players they can keep and which players they might have to trade. Stephen A. was emphasizing how Olave is exactly the type of player who could become available in a trade because the Saints need cap relief, they need draft picks to rebuild, and Olave still has value as a young receiver who's shown he can be a legitimate number one. He's healthy. Shannon jumped back in, talking at Chris Olave be perfect for what he was breaking down how Sean McVay's offense is all about creating mismatches, getting receivers in space, and using motion and shifts to confuse defenses. Shannon made this point about how Olave's skill set would fit perfectly in that system because he's not just a straight line speed guy, he's a technician who can run the entire route tree, who has excellent footwork and can create separation at all 3 levels of the field. Shannon was really emphasizing how McVay would have a field day with a player like Olave because of all the different ways he could use him. Mad Dog interrupted and he started talking about the urgency of the situation for the Rams. He was yelling about how Stafford just turned whatever age he is, how Cooper Kupp is getting older, how Aaron Donald retired, and how this team's championship window is not going to stay open forever. Mad Dog made this really compelling point about how when you have a quarterback playing at an MVP level like Stafford just did, you cannot waste that. You have to go all in and give that quarterback every possible weapon to succeed. He was comparing it to what the Buccaneers did when they had Tom Brady, how they went out and added guys like Antonio Brown and Rob Gronkowski because they knew they had a limited window with Brady and they needed to maximize it. Stephen A. came back and started talking about the specific needs of the Rams offense and why adding Chris Olave makes so much sense from a personnel standpoint. He was breaking down how Puka Nacua is obviously their #1 guy now, how he's a beast who can line up anywhere and make plays, but Stephen A. made this point about how defenses are going to start game planning specifically to stop Puka, and when that happens, the Rams need another receiver who can beat single coverage and make defenses pay for focusing too much attention on Nacua. Stephen A. was really emphasizing how having 2 elite receivers instead of just one completely changes the math for defenses and makes it almost impossible to stop an offense. Shannon got back in there and he started talking about the financial aspect of this potential trade, and I thought this was a really smart angle to take. He was explaining how Chris Olave is still on his rookie contract, which makes him incredibly valuable because you're getting elite production at a fraction of what it would cost to sign a comparable receiver in free agency. Shannon broke down how the Rams could potentially trade for Olave without completely destroying their salary cap situation, and how having a player of his caliber on a team-friendly deal would give them flexibility to address other needs on their roster as well. Mad Dog was nodding along, and then he started talking about the competitive landscape of the NFC right now. He was yelling about how the 49ers are still really good, how the Seahawks just made the Super Bowl and are a powerhouse, how the Cardinals are improving, and how the Rams need to keep pace with all these teams in their division if they want to stay relevant. Mad Dog made this point about how the NFC West might be the toughest division in football right now, and if the Rams want to compete for division titles and playoff spots, they need to continue adding elite talent to their roster. Stephen A. then shifted the conversation to talk about what it would actually cost to get Chris Olave out of New Orleans. He was speculating about different trade scenarios, talking about how maybe it would be a first-round pick, maybe it would be a first and a third, maybe it would involve a young player going back to the Saints. Stephen A. was really getting into the weeds about what would be fair value for both sides, and he made this interesting point about how the Rams have shown in the past that they're willing to trade multiple first-round picks to win now, so giving up one first-rounder for a proven receiver like Olave shouldn't be something they hesitate on. Shannon jumped in and started comparing this potential situation to other big trades that have changed franchises recently. He brought up how the Chiefs traded for guys like Frank Clark back in the day, how the Eagles have been aggressive in trading for players, and how the teams that win championships are usually the ones that are willing to make bold moves to improve their rosters. Shannon was making this broader point about how sitting back and hoping you hit on draft picks isn't always the best strategy when you have a championship window open, and sometimes you need to be aggressive and go get proven players who you know can contribute immediately. Mad Dog started getting really animated, and he was talking about the injury concerns with Chris Olave, because obviously that's something that can't be ignored in this discussion. He brought up the concussion history, the fact that Olave missed significant time last season, and how that's a legitimate risk for any team thinking about trading for him. But then Mad Dog flipped it and said that high-risk, high-reward moves are what separate good teams from great teams. And if the Rams' medical staff does their homework and feels comfortable with where Olave is at from a health perspective, then the potential reward is worth the risk. Stephen A. came back and he started talking about Matthew Stafford specifically and how having another elite weapon would benefit him at this stage of his career. Stephen A. was making this point about how Stafford just proved he can still play at an MVP level, but even the best quarterbacks need help. They need guys who can get open, who can make contested catches, and who can create separation against good coverage. He emphasized how adding Olave would give Stafford another security blanket, another guy he can trust to make plays in crucial moments, and that's invaluable for a quarterback who's trying to lead his team to another championship. Shannon got back in there and started talking about the development aspect of this move and how it would impact the younger players on the Rams' roster. He was explaining how having multiple elite receivers would actually help Puka Nacua's development because defenses couldn't focus all their attention on him, and it would also help the development of their other young receivers because they'd be getting better matchups. Shannon made this really interesting point about how great players make everyone around them better, and adding Olave would elevate the entire receiving core. Mad Dog interrupted again, and he started talking about what this move would mean from a culture and momentum standpoint. He was yelling about how the Rams just had their quarterback win MVP, they're getting national attention, the fan base is excited, and making a splash move like trading for Chris Olave would keep that momentum going into next season. Mad Dog was really emphasizing the psychological aspect of making big moves and how it sends a message to your locker room, to your fan base, and to the rest of the league that you're serious about winning championships. Stephen A. then brought up the Saints' perspective again and started talking about why New Orleans might actually be motivated to move Olave even though he's one of their best young players. He was explaining how the Saints are in such a desperate cap situation that they might not have a choice, how they need to get younger and rebuild through the draft, and how trading a player like Olave could net them multiple picks that would help accelerate that rebuild. Stephen A. made this point about how sometimes trades work out for both teams, where one team gets the proven player they need to win now, and the other team gets the draft capital they need to build for the future. Shannon jumped back in and he started talking about Sean McVay and how he's one of the best offensive minds in football at utilizing talent. Shannon was explaining how McVay has a track record of getting the most out of his receivers, how he's developed guys like Cooper Kupp into superstars, and how having a player with Olave's skill set would give him even more options when he's designing plays and calling the offense. Shannon really emphasized how the combination of McVay's play calling and Olave's talent could be special. Mad Dog came back and he was talking about the timeline of all this and when the Rams would need to make a move. He was explaining how the NFL offseason works, how trades can happen before the draft or during the draft, and how the Rams would need to act quickly if they're serious about acquiring Olave because other teams are going to be interested too. Mad Dog was really emphasizing the competitive nature of the trade market and how the Rams can't afford to sit back and wait if they want to get this deal done. Stephen A. started wrapping up his thoughts by talking about the bigger picture for the Rams and where they fit in the NFC hierarchy right now. He was saying how the Rams are a good team that could be great with one or two more pieces, and Chris Olave could be one of those pieces that puts them over the top. Stephen A. emphasized how the window to win with Stafford is limited, how you can't waste years of prime production from an MVP caliber quarterback, and how the Rams need to be aggressive in pursuing players who can help them compete for championships right now. Shannon had some final thoughts about the specific ways that adding Olave would change the Rams' offensive identity. He was talking about how right now the Rams are a good offense, but they're somewhat predictable in terms of where the ball is going, and adding Olave would give them so much more diversity in their passing attack. Shannon made this point about how the best offenses in the league are the ones that can attack defenses in multiple ways, and having Nacua and Olave as your top two receivers would give the Rams the ability to spread defenses out and create mismatches all over the field. Mad Dog wrapped things up by talking about the fan base and what this move would mean for Rams fans who have been through so much with this franchise over the years. He was talking about how Rams fans deserve to see their team competing for championships, how they've been loyal through the ups and downs, and how making a move like trading for Chris Olave would show the fan base that the organization is committed to winning. Mad Dog was really passionate about how important it is for teams to show their fans that they're trying to win, not just trying to be competitive. The whole segment was probably close to 25 minutes long, and I'm telling you, it was absolutely riveting television. The way all three of them broke down the scheme fit, the financial implications, the championship window considerations, the medical concerns, and the competitive landscape of the NFC was just really impressive. And what struck me most was how, despite their different styles and approaches to sports commentary, they all seemed to agree that this move would make a ton of sense for the Rams if they can get it done at the right price. What keeps running through my mind is how perfect the timing of this could be. The Rams just had their quarterback win MVP and announce he's coming back for another season. The Saints are in a terrible salary cap situation and might be forced to trade one of their best young players. Chris Olave is exactly the type of receiver who could take the Rams offense from good to elite. And the Rams have shown throughout their history that they're not afraid to make bold moves and trade draft picks when they have a championship window. Everything seems to be aligning for this to potentially happen. I also keep thinking about what Stephen A. said about not wasting Matthew Stafford's final years in the league. Stafford just proved he can still play at an MVP level. He's got maybe 2 or 3 more elite years left in him, and the Rams owe it to him to surround him with as much talent as possible. You can't just hope that everything works out. You have to be proactive and aggressive about improving your roster when you have a quarterback playing at that level. The injury concerns with Olave are real and can't be ignored, but as Mad Dog pointed out, you can't let fear prevent you from making moves that could significantly improve your team. Every player in the NFL carries some level of injury risk, and if the medical staff feels comfortable with where Olave is at from a health perspective, then you have to trust their evaluation and pull the trigger on the trade. What also really resonated with me was Shannon's point about how having 2 elite receivers completely changes the dynamic of your offense. Right now, defenses can focus most of their attention on Puka Nacua and dare the other receivers to beat them. But if you add Chris Olave to the mix, suddenly defenses are in a no-win situation where they have to pick their poison, and that's when offenses become truly unstoppable. The thought of Stafford having both Nacua and Olave to throw to, along with whatever they have at running back and tight end, is honestly terrifying from a defensive perspective. I keep coming back to the financial aspect as well, because Shannon made such a great point about how Olave being on a rookie contract makes him way more valuable than a comparable veteran receiver would be. The Rams could potentially add an elite talent without having to commit huge money in free agency, which would allow them to address other needs on their roster as well. That kind of flexibility is crucial when you're trying to build a championship team. The comparison Mad Dog made to what the Buccaneers did with Tom Brady really stuck with me too. When you have a Hall of Fame quarterback playing at a high level, you can't be conservative with your roster building. You have to go all in and give that quarterback every advantage possible. The Buccaneers understood that with Brady, and look what happened. They won a Super Bowl. The Rams need to have that same mentality with Stafford because his window won't stay open forever. Stephen A. His point about the NFC hierarchy was also really important because the Rams are in such a tough division and conference right now. The Seahawks just made the Super Bowl, the 49ers are still really good, and the Cardinals are on the rise. If the Rams want to compete for division titles and playoff spots, they can't stand pat and hope things work out. They need to make moves that improve their roster and give them an edge over their rivals. What I found most compelling about the entire discussion was how all 3 of them acknowledged the risks, but still concluded that the potential reward outweighs those risks. Trading for Chris Olave isn't a guarantee of anything, but it significantly improves the Rams' chances of competing for championships over the next few years. And when you have a quarterback who just won MVP and announced he's coming back for another season, isn't that exactly the time when you should be making aggressive moves to maximize your championship window? The more I think about everything that was discussed on First Take yesterday, the more convinced I am that the Rams should seriously pursue this trade. The fit makes sense from a scheme perspective. The timing makes sense from a championship window perspective. The financial aspect makes sense because of Olave's contract situation, and the opportunity might be there because the Saints are in such a desperate cap situation. Sometimes in the NFL, all the pieces fall into place for a potential blockbuster trade, and I think this might be one of those situations. I also keep thinking about what this would mean for the Rams offense specifically. Right now, they're good. They can score points, they can move the ball, but they're not at that elite level where they can consistently beat the best defenses in the league. Adding Chris Olave could be what pushes them over that edge and makes them a true offensive juggernaut that can hang with anybody in the league. And when you combine that with the defensive improvements they could potentially make, you're looking at a team that could legitimately compete for a Super Bowl. The Sean McVay factor that Shannon brought up is also really important because McVay is one of the best offensive minds in football when it comes to scheming receivers open and creating favorable matchups. Having a player with Olave's talent and versatility would give McVay so many more options when he's designing plays and calling the offense. The thought of what McVay could do with both Nacua and Olave at his disposal is honestly exciting from a pure football strategy perspective. At the end of the day, the Rams need to ask themselves what they're willing to do to maximize Matthew Stafford's remaining years in the league. Are they content being a good team that makes the playoffs and maybe wins a game or two? Or are they willing to make bold moves and take calculated risks to put themselves in position to compete for championships? Adding Chris Olave wouldn't guarantee them anything, but it would give them a legitimate shot at being one of the best teams in the NFC. And when you have a Hall of Fame quarterback playing at an MVP level, that's all you can really ask for. The Saints' desperation with their salary cap situation creates a unique opportunity for a team like the Rams to potentially acquire an elite young player without having to give up an absolutely insane package. If New Orleans is motivated to move Olave because they need the cap relief and the draft picks, then Los Angeles should be first in line making an offer. This is the kind of opportunity that doesn't come around very often, where you can potentially get a proven commodity at a position of need without completely mortgaging your future. What really struck me most about watching that First Take segment was how passionate all three of them were about this topic. You could tell they all genuinely believed that this move would make sense for the Rams, and their reasoning was sound. The scheme fit is there, the financial aspect works, the championship window is open, and the opportunity might be available. Sometimes in sports, you have to trust your gut and make moves that might seem risky but have huge potential upside, and I think trading for Chris Olave would be exactly that kind of move for the Los Angeles Rams. Thinking back on everything that was said from Stephen A., his emphasis on not wasting Stafford's prime years, to Shannon's breakdown of the scheme fit and how having multiple elite receivers changes everything, to Mad Dog's passion about being aggressive when you have a championship window, it all just makes so much sense. The Rams are in a position where they should be buyers, not sellers or stay-patters. They have an MVP quarterback, they have a great coach, they have some really good pieces already in place, and adding one more elite weapon could be what takes them from being a good team to being a legitimate Super Bowl contender. I keep going back to that moment when Stafford said he's coming back for another year because that announcement should have been a signal to the front office that it's time to go all in. You have your franchise quarterback who just won MVP telling you he wants to keep playing and keep competing for championships. The response to that can't be to just run it back with the same roster and hope things work out better next year. The response has to be to do everything in your power to give that quarterback the weapons and support he needs to compete at the highest level. And that's exactly what trading for Chris Olave would accomplish. That's what I took away from watching First Take yesterday, and that's why I'm absolutely convinced that this Chris Olave to the Rams discussion is something we all need to be paying very close attention to as we move through this offseason. This could realistically happen, and if it does, it could completely transform the Rams' offense and make them one of the most dangerous teams in the entire NFC for the next few seasons.